Alright, so we got this 2003 Acura in here. It's a CL Type-S V6. We're going to do a timing belt and water pump on. First thing we're going to do is get rid of all this stuff here, just because it covers up the power steering pump. And this little plate here actually covers up part of the timing cover. So I'm just going to remove this real quick and remove these, and then we'll get into the actual job itself. And one thing I'll reiterate, I've said this before in other timing belt videos, if you're going to do this job yourself and you haven't done a lot of them or haven't done any of them, or just kind of a casual do-it-yourselfer, be careful. It's just my disclaimer here. Be careful if you do these. This is an interference engine, which means if you do it wrong, the valves will hit your pistons, and then your valves will probably bend, and then you're pulling the head off, and you're looking at a pretty hefty repair bill. So timing belts aren't particularly hard or super technical, but if you do it wrong, just be warned that you will have major engine damage, especially on this particular car. Any car, it's an interference engine. Some cars you can get away with it. It's not interference. This is an interference engine, so I just want to put that out there. I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but I definitely don't want anyone to do this and then something goes wrong or they don't get something right and then they ruin their engine, so, or end up with a big engine repair. So that's just my disclaimer on this. I'm going to pull those covers off real quick, and then we'll start getting into the job itself. Alright, the first thing I like to do on these Hondas and Acuras is get rid of this power steering pump. Move it out of the way. Usually what I do is I block off this hose here, and then I'll take this hose off. You'll lose a little bit of fluid, not too bad, and then block it off so you don't keep losing it, because this will flop around. And then you have a tensioner right here. You got to loosen that. There's two bolts on the bottom. There's one on this end and one on this end. Take those loose and loosen that tensioner, and that'll loosen this belt. Get the belt out of the way, and then we can take it completely off and just set it off to the side. There's no need to take any of this off. We can set it off to the side. So get your two bolts loose and get your tensioner going loose. Get this belt off. You won't be able to pull this belt all the way off until you get your alternator belt and all that stuff off. There's a tensioner down here, way down there, that right there. I believe it's, I don't remember what the bolt size is on it, but I'll let you know. Get that off, and then both the belts can come off. So right now I'm just going to work on loosening this power steering pump and getting the belt out of the way. Alright, I just want to kind of show you this while it's off. You've got one 12mm bolt back here. You have a 12mm nut on this side that goes through the housing right there. Sorry, I'm way off on the camera, really. Goes through the housing right there. Once you get those off, you can set this off to the side. And I'll show you major camera difficulties today. So this is the tensioner here. You don't have to pull that off. But this slides up and down, and the nut goes right there for the power steering pump. And this is what adjusts your tension on your power steering. So now that's out of the way, what I'll do next is get the other tensioner, or get the other serpentine belt off, and then we'll probably work on the motor mount, the top motor mount here, and the lower crank pulley. Alright, so what you want to do now is secure the engine underneath with a block of wood and a jack, because we're going to remove this front motor mount here. You got two 14s and then a 17 on the side here. So just remove those, and this top piece should pull up. But just make sure you secure the engine before you do that. Alright, once you get that motor mount out of the way, you should be able to remove your power steering belt. Get that out of the way, and now we're going to go underneath and remove the crank pulley, and then we'll take the timing covers off. So I already got the wheel off and that plastic shield off. So anyway, we'll remove that crank pulley, and then usually I want to say I take the tensioner off too on these, and remove that out of the way. It makes it easier to get to some of the bolts, I think, if I remember correctly. Anyway, yep, crank bolt next. All right, if you've watched any of my previous Honda videos, you know that this crank bolt is extremely hard to get off. They have a special tool that goes inside this hex area here that you can hold it, that holds this. You put it up against the frame, the holder, and then you get a big pry bar and crank on this thing. And this thing is unbelievably tight. If you've ever done a Honda, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't done a Honda, I wouldn't even bother getting that special tool that goes in here. What I would do is get the Lyle socket. Again, I've got other videos showing this, but just in case you haven't seen those, get yourself the Lyle sockets. It's 770. It's 77080, and it'll zip these right off. So anyway, I'll show you the socket, and then we'll zip this off, and then move on from there. All right, that's what the socket looks like. It's got a real thick wall on it, 19 mil. Goes right on there, and get yourself a good impact, and it should zip right off. You can see there, even the Milwaukee had a little bit of trouble getting it at first, but it came off. Like I said, you can get that special tool and play around with all that. I don't like doing that. I just like getting them off quick and easy with the impact. And this socket is more than paid for itself. If you do these Hondas, it's been an issue for decades on these Hondas getting these bolts off. I remember back in the 90s, I used to put the bolt on there at the breaker, hit the starter, figure out which way the engine's going, and then put the breaker the opposite way and hit the starter to get them loose. It's how hard they were to get loose. So they've always been hard to get loose. Every once in a while you might get lucky and want to come off, but you could tell right there that one was really on there, even with the big Milwaukee hammering on it. So anyway, get the Lyle 77080, and you can make short work of it. You're not sitting there fighting it for 20 minutes or longer. So anyway, we'll pull this off. This is just keyed on there. Just rock it back and forth. It'll come off. And then we'll start taking these timing covers off. Get down to the belt where we need to be. All right, it seemed like in the past I pulled the tensioner off these before. I guess, I don't know, different years or what. But this one I don't think I have to. I pulled the dipstick tube out just to get better access to it. So now you're down to really just the covers. You take the covers off, and then we pull this mount out, and then you're down to where you need to be. So go ahead and take all the 10 millimeter bolts around the perimeter, and there is one recess back in the cover right here on both sides. And then you have 10 millimeter bolts on the bottom. Those all come out, and then you should be able to see your belt and everything. And then we'll pull this mount out here and put it top dead center. So just get your covers off now, all 10 mil, and we'll pick it back up from there. One thing I'll mention about these top covers is pull them up. When you get them all out, pull it up. There's a slide on the top cover that goes into the bottom cover. It locks in. Same when you put it back together. Make sure you put that slide in, line it up, push down on it. If you don't, you won't get those bolts lined up right. Just a little trick or tip. These are slides. Just pull them up, and then when you put it back on, slide them back in before you put the bolts in. All right, once you get the timing covers off, you'll have this motor mount to get off. There's 3 14 millimeters. The bottom one won't come out until you get it. Just get it all the way loose. It won't come out because it's hit the fender. But these two top ones are kind of hidden behind inside here. Anyway, 3 14s, pull it out, and now you're down to the belt. So what I'm going to do now is get it on top dead center before I do anything else. So we'll go underneath and crank the crankshaft over till the 2 arrows line up, and then we'll check and make sure if we're on top dead center, if we're 180 out. So I'll kind of show you that in a second here. All right, I'm going to try to show you the best I can. This is at 12 o'clock position, basically. There's a tiny little arrow right here on the sprocket. I don't know if it's picking it up on the camera. And then there's a notch in the engine with a tiny little arrow. You want to line those up. It's basically 12 o'clock on this cotter pin, but you don't want to guess on this. So just clean it off real good. I don't know if it's picking up on the camera. There's a little dot right here on that sprocket, and then there's a little arrow on the engine case. So that's where the bottom needs to be. And I'll kind of show you where the top should be. All right, on the top here, kind of hard to show everything here with this. On the top here, you have this notch right here in the case, and there's a number 1 on the sprocket. You want to line the number 1 tooth up with this notch on the front sprocket, on the front camshaft. There's also a notch in this tooth right here, but each one of them have a notch. But you just want to go to number 1. If you're on number 5, then you're 180 out, and don't pull your belt off. And on this side, I don't know if I can get in here with this. There's a notch on the crank camshaft, and then there's a notch just like there is on the other side right here. And you just line those 2 up. They should be lined up. If you're at the bottom lined up and you're on number 1 here, then this one should be lined up too, as long as no one's messed with the belt. I mean, you still want to check it, but if this is down here and number 5's pointing up, then you're 180 out, which means you got to turn that bottom crank a full turn, and then you'll be on top dead center. Number 1 should be up here. The crank and the notch should be up here on this side, and then you're okay to pull your belt off. So, and once you pull this belt off, do not turn your crank or any of this stuff, or you'll throw it out of time. So, I mean, there should be no reason to do that, but just for knowledge, don't turn any of these pulleys. I mean, you take your idler pulley off and all that, but you don't want to turn your crankshaft, either one of your camshaft pulleys or your crankshaft sprocket down there once you get this belt off. So once you're lined up, you're good to take the belt off. Normally what I do is just loosen the tensioner over here, get it pretty loose, and the belt should come off. These Hondas are pretty good about, especially these V6s, about the belt just sliding off once you get that tensioner loose. So anyway, we'll do that, and then we'll take this water pump off. All right, so we got the whole water pump off. There's only 5 bolts holding on. You just pull those 5 bolts off, and then it'll come right off. I already got the new one tacked on there. And your new kit should come with all new pulleys and tensioners. If they don't, I would suggest getting a kit that does, or buying them. You don't want to put the new belt on with old stuff. So anyway, we'll put this stuff on and line this belt up. I already got the water pump torqued down, so we'll pull the tensioner off, put a pin in it, and put that back on. Then we'll go put these on. So that'll be the next step, is to put these tensioner pulleys on. All right, so normally these kits come with the tensioner. This one did not, and what you do if you don't replace this is put it in a vise and compress this down until that hole lines up, and then you put either an Allen wrench or a pin in there. I put this one in the vise. It didn't want to compress, and I'm not taking any chances. I mean, I could have forced it, but I'm not going to take any chances with any kind of timing component. So I just had another one delivered. So anyway, check that. If yours doesn't come in the kit, make sure you get this. I always like to replace it anyway, but I mean, you can reuse these and compress it down. But this one, there's something a little off with this, or something's not right, so I don't trust it. I'm not going to take any chances at all with the timing components. So went and got a new one. So we'll put all this stuff on, and I'll kind of show you how you line it up, and then we'll start putting this thing back together. All right, so one thing I pointed out before on these kits, this is the new one here. And it does not have that sleeve that you need. You can actually install this without that sleeve, and it wouldn't be a good thing to do. So if you're not real familiar with it, do not install that. Get your old one here. You see here's the bolt. Take that out and then pull this sleeve out. You need to put this in the new one. So it goes on the back side. So they're lined up like this. You can see how, this is the sleeve. So just pull that out. It should slide right out like this, and then slide it right back into the new one. So yeah, these don't come with that. I haven't seen any kits that have. So don't forget, that's just a little note. Don't forget to put that sleeve in. And definitely don't install this without the sleeve. You technically probably could, but it would move around quite a bit. So anyway, we're going to install this stuff back on the engine, and then we'll get that belt lined up. And when you get this tensioner here, it's going to have this pin in it. Do not remove that. You go ahead and install this on the engine. Don't remove this pin until you get your belt all lined up and ready to go. This is your tensioner. This will pop out and hold the tension against the tensioner for your belt tension. If you pull this out before you put your belt on, the belt will be almost impossible to get on. It'll be so tight. So leave this pin in, install it on the engine first, and then once you get your belt on and all lined up and everything's good, then you can go ahead and pull this pin. All right, so the tensioner's installed down there, 2 10mm bolts. You can see I still have the pin in right there, so don't pull that out again. Now we'll install the actual tensioner pulley, and there's an idler pulley over here on this side we have to install. So get those 2 installed, and then we'll go start putting this belt back on. All right, you can see all the tensioners are back installed. Now's a good time to make sure your camshafts haven't turned, your crankshaft hasn't turned at all. Mine actually did move a tooth over on the back side. So I'll tell you how to get around that or fix that. Anyway, start on these Hondas, start on the bottom crankshaft pulley. Come up towards the front of the car. Go around the idler pulley, come around this front camshaft. Go under the water pump, hit the back camshaft. And since mine moved the tooth, I'm going to take a 17mm open end and I'm going to crank it back a little and then lock that belt in. And then when I get it locked in, I'll come back around, hit that tensioner there, and then the belt should be on. Sometimes they have a tendency, they will move a little, especially on these Hondas. It seems like, you know, when it's on top of that center, it's really loaded on the lifters there. So, anyway, like I said, start at the bottom, go to the front, and then if one of yours is off, use a 17mm open end, and just turn it a little bit until you get it locked into the belt. And then once you get it locked into the belt should hold it as you finish putting the belt on. So double check all your marks, put the belt on, and then we'll spin it over a couple times and then pull that pin. You spin it over by hand, not by the starter, by the way. But anyway, that's just, we double check it. We'll spin it over about 4 times and make sure all the marks line back up once the belt's on. And once the belt's on, spun over 4 times, they line up. Because if you spin it over once, you'll be 180 out. So you got to spin it over 2 full revelations to make sure your marks are lined up. And I usually do 4 just to double check. And then I'll pull the pin on that tensioner and I'll spin it over twice again just to make sure. And then once that is done, you're confident the belt is on right and everything's lined up, then you can put that motor mount back in and start putting the covers back on. So anyway, we'll put the belt on and I'll pick up from there. One thing I'll add, before I put this belt on, I'll take an air hose and blow this out, especially down by the crankshaft really good, just to make sure there's no debris where the timing belt is going to be running. It's a good practice to get into. Just blow it all out real good and make sure there's nothing in there before you put the belt on. All right, so I pulled the pin and rotated it 2 more times and they all line back up. So now it's ready to go back in. Just make sure that you rotate it a few times. They're lined up, pull the pin, rotate a few more times. If they're all lined up, then you're good to go. So at this point, we will put that big motor mount back on and then start putting the covers back on. All right, so the covers are back on. I went ahead and put the crank pulley back on. Just slide it back on the keyway and tighten your 19mm down. I put the serpentine back on the alternator. And now I'm going to put and don't forget to put your power steering belt behind it, because you can't take this power steering belt without taking the motor mount out. So you want to get that behind your serpentine belt and get it on before you put the motor mount or anything back together. I think what I'm going to do next is put the power steering pump back on, and then I think all we'll have left is that motor mount and put the wheel back on and the plastic shield and a couple little connectors here and there, and then fill it up with some coolant. So I'll get on that and I'll let you know. Alright, so once you get the pump bolt started, just run this down until your belt is tight. And then hook your hose back up if you took it off, which you would have had to have. And then tighten your bolts back up. I went ahead and put the motor mount back in. It's pretty self-explanatory. Don't forget to put your dipstick tube back in. And now it's just basically a matter of a few odd and end bolts for wiring harnesses and stuff like that. And then we're ready to fire it and put coolant in it. So I'm just going to finish up a couple of little bolts that need to be finished up, and then we'll fire it up and make sure it runs and put some coolant in it. Alright, so here it is done running. If you take your power steering line off, make sure to refill your power steering reservoir. Turn your heat on and let it idle for a little while. And put coolant in it until you start getting heat and the bubbles stop and it's topped off. And then the only thing we have to do now is just test drive it, make sure there's no leaks anywhere. You know, with you're not really opening up the engine other than the water pump, so as long as you're not leaking coolant out the top or out the front, you're fine. But that's pretty much it. Just remember to put your dipstick tube back in. Like I said, it's not a super in-depth job. You just want to make sure you get that timing belt right. Otherwise, you'll be in for some big problems. But if you have any questions, leave some comments. And I guess if you like this video, so please subscribe to the YouTube channel so we can reach more people and keep this going. So I think that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.